Well, um, as you probably know, we're closing in on the end of the marking period, and this is going to be the first day of our new unit on Dubliners by James Joyce. So I'm going to introduce it today. Before we get into it, though, I want to show you the calendar and give you a scope of what the rest of the marking period is going to look like, just so it's in the back of your head and you're not taken by surprise when we get to the fourth marking period. It's coming up a lot sooner than I think you think. Just give me a second to open this. As I'm opening this, does anyone have any questions for me? Okay. So here's the calendar. As you can see, we're on March 1st. The 19th is the last day of the marking period. We have Wednesday the 3rd and Wednesday the 17th. These are early dismissal days for us. And you are all off on the 12th. Okay, so it's not even 3 full weeks that we have left. So we're starting Dubliners today. Dubliners is composed of 15 stories. We're going to be just reading 5 of those. So the plan is to study those, and on the 11th, the day before this day off, we're going to have a quiz on those stories. It'll be written and in class, just so you know that's on the horizon. For the end of this unit, though, it won't be a giant multiple choice test. Since it's a collection of short stories that focus on kind of everyday life in a kind of regular sort of place, I'm going to have you guys work on your own short stories, and that'll be the final test grade for the marking period. So we haven't done any real creative writing in here, so I think this might be fun for you if any of you are writers, or even if you're not, you get to be a little bit more expressive and original. So basically the last week of this will be devoted to just writing the short story. And so if you want, you could start thinking in the back of your head, have some ideas percolating about what you might want to write about, so you're not too surprised by it. Later this week, I'll talk about the parameters for that, but I just want you to keep everything in perspective as we get closer to the end here. Okay. And your book club essay is due on Monday. I'll give you some time this week to work on that as well. But I know that's a lot of writing, but I'll try to give you a lot of time, plenty of support to accomplish those papers. All right, so that's where we stand. And here's what we're doing for today. Okay, my goal is just to introduce you to Dubliners and its author, James Joyce. In the second half of class, I'll give you some time to start reading the first story of Dubliners, which is called The Sisters. And for homework and classwork, you'll be recording a few observations and notes about it. So have any of you heard of James Joyce before this? That name ring a bell, or do you know anything he wrote? All right, if not, that's okay. So if you were to Google greatest authors, greatest English language authors, invariably at the top of that list or near the top would be James Joyce. Same if you were to search for like best novels ever written, his works would come towards the top. He's widely considered to be a literary genius, somewhere along the lines of Shakespeare, basically someone who created some of the most studied and obsessed over books. His most famous book is Ulysses. I'll talk about that in a second. And his last book, his final book, was his most difficult one. His books kind of got more advanced as he aged. So I just want to show you the first page of his final book, which is a novel called Finnegan's Wake, just so you can see like where this guy's head was at. Okay, so this is the first page of Finnegan's Wake. I'll let you try to read it and see if you can make sense of it. Full disclosure, I don't really know what it means either, but I like this word. Ba 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 dalgaraga ta common. Yeah, I don't know. This is like a thing that he did. He just like made up words, right? Just kind of did whatever he wanted and broke all the rules of how to write. There is meaning to this though, and he deliberately wrote it like this. He knew what he was doing. The whole novel is like that thick, and every page is like this. It's basically unreadable, but people try to read it, and there's a method to the madness. There is a storyline here, and a lot of his words have like 3 different meanings that he's playing off of. You also might notice the first word, the first letter of the first word is lowercase. That's because the last sentence of the novel feeds into the first sentence. So the idea is the whole thing goes in a giant loop and you finish it and then you start again. It's just like really bizarre stuff. So we're not going to read anything this excessive, but I want you to see this so you know the guy who's writing Dubliners is also the guy who's producing this. So even though Dubliners is a much more straightforward story, it's from this mind. So there's a whole lot going on underneath the surface, even though the stories themselves seem sort of straightforward and simple. Right? Yeah, is he a genius? Is he just senile or crazy? He's probably a bit crazy, but yeah, he's widely considered to be a genius. There are books that are just about like, what does this mean? Like people spend years deciphering all this, and it does have a meaning. Okay, in any case, let me tell you a bit more about him. So James Joyce, this is him. He kind of like, that's to me some like guy wearing a bow tie with an eye patch and this weird mustache. Like, yeah, that's what someone who wrote that book would look like. Anyway, he's this Irish author. He was born and raised in Dublin, but left Ireland as a young adult and never went back. Despite that, all of his stories are set in Ireland, and he has sort of like a love-hate relationship with it. And Dubliners takes place in Dublin. It's about Dubliners, people who live there, and explores like these people, what it means to be Irish. His most famous novel is Ulysses. That's the one that'll always pop up on like the 100 best novels ever written lists. You might recognize the title. Ulysses is the Latin name of Odysseus. He basically took the Odyssey and said, I'm gonna take the Odyssey and I'm gonna rewrite it so it takes place during a single day in Dublin. And so instead of Odysseus being this great hero, it's just some Irish guy who's walking around, like spending his day, and it's all about like his point of view and perspective about like the things that he experiences going about his business. What James Joyce is most famous for is stream of consciousness, a style of writing that he kind of innovated and perfected. Stream of consciousness is putting down the experience of living on paper. So if you think about like what your thoughts are as you're going through the day, you're walking around and your mind flits about from idea to idea. You think, hey, what's for lunch? What am I going to do this weekend? You think about that thing that you should have said to that person a while ago. Think about your homework, some random memory of like 10 years ago. You think about a line from a song. Like there's just this non-stop stream of thoughts that pop into your head. You can't help it. What Joyce was trying to do was capture that experience of the randomness of consciousness, how these things just pop into your head. And that's kind of his style. It's just words appear and they're connected and you could kind of see the connection, but it's not at all like a straightforward narrative. He's doing something very experimental and different. And you kind of get a sense of that in Dubliners, although it's a bit more straightforward and traditional in its style. But what he was trying to do with Dubliners is kind of depict the gritty reality of life in Dublin. So let me introduce Dubliners by asking you a question. This might seem random, but there's a reason I'm asking it. It does connect. If you had to come up with a single word that captures what you feel is everything wrong with America, what would that word be? Like one word. Could address social issues, cultural issues, political issues, economic issues. What's the one thing that's wrong? I'll let you just put it in the chat. What do you think is that one word? And I know it's hard to just pick one thing, but do your best. What's the one problem? One root problem? Ooh, I like these. Human? Yeah, I mean, I suppose all our problems do stem from us being human. Ungrounded, selfishness, complacency, a couple of greeds, injustice, disagreement, bias, judgment, bias. A lot of these are really good. Pride. Is there anyone who wants to elaborate on their word and why they picked it and why they think it's best?
Can I?
Corruption. You want to call it?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I recently watched, for a bit of background, I recently watched this documentary with my grandmother, The Reunited States of America, and that's kind of where I got mine from, which was Judgment. And we're so quick to judge other people, and we're like, and also we also hear things, and then we quickly jump to that judgment as well. Like the people who say that like Democrats like demonetize the Republicans, and Republicans monetizing Democrats, and everyone demonetizing other ethnicities and races and all that. And we're just so quick to judge them just based on what we've heard, and we just don't get to know them. We judge them before, and then that shapes how we think of them, and then and that just hurts it because we don't get to know the people. We just think them as a group of stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, for me, I would probably go to partisanship first, but I like judgment because it's more all encompassing. It's not just about politics. It is just about our tendency to judge people what we see. And we had last period I did this, and someone said Republicans, and then someone said Democrats in response, and it was like you get a chuckle. But that's like sort of our human tendency, and part of the problem is that we are quick to form tribes and demonize the other tribe, and it's just human nature. But I think it's also important to be aware of that tendency because everyone has it and work against it, whether it's a tendency to tribalize in politics or with your race or your gender or anything. Yeah, or social class, wealth, definitely. But okay, Norman, and then Deja, and then I'll move on.
I think that if everyone was more grounded, then we would be able to communicate.
Wait, sorry, my audio's cutting out. Could you say that again?
I think if we were more grounded, then there would be less miscommunication and there'd be less arguing because we'd be in a better state to deliver our opinions, and there would be less disagreement and more understanding.
Good. You're still like, I don't know if other people are having this experience. I heard it, but it was still kind of faint for me. But could you elaborate on what exactly you mean by grounded? I'm guessing you mean sort of like down to earth. But what would that look like for someone to be more grounded?
I think being more grounded would be like you're aware of where you are and like you're aware of your body. You're not just in your head, kind of like the super ego and the ego and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So like just like calm and collected.
Yeah, I like that. I do think people get caught up in the moment and just need to like chill out a bit a lot of times. Good. Okay, Deja.
I had trouble finding a word at first, but now I think that I found kind of the perfect word. That comes to mind is hubris. We as I think a big problem is that we're so conceited and so self-confident in ourselves that we create kind of a God complex because we're told all the time that we're special in a way like no one else, to the point where it almost becomes dangerous to force that idea onto people, making America what it is today.
That's a great point too. I think humility could go a long way to solving some of these problems. All right, good. So the reason I have you do this exercise is because James Joyce was engaged in the same kind of work in his time. You know, he loved Ireland. He also hated it. It was his home, but he saw so many problems with it, and he wanted to expose those problems. He had one particular word for what he thought was wrong with his country, though. Might be kind of a surprising word. It was paralysis. He saw his country as paralyzed. And he wrote about this and about why he wrote Dubliners. And he said, with writing Dubliners, my intention was to write a chapter of the moral history of my country. And I chose Dublin for the scene because the city seemed to me to be the center of paralysis. I have tried to present it to the indifferent public under 4 of its aspects: childhood, adolescence, maturity, and public life. The stories are arranged in this order. I've written it for the most part in the style of scrupulous meanness, and with the conviction that he is a very bold man who dares to alter in the presentment, still more to deform, whatever he has seen and heard. Okay, so paralysis is what he's concerned about, right? And he says he's trying here to write the moral history of his country. What do you think he means by that? What does it mean to write the moral history? As opposed to, say, regular history. I know that seems kind of abstract and hard. Anyone want to just take a stab at it, though? No wrong answers. We're just thinking out loud here. And I mean, think about what moral means and morality, which we've discussed, and that might help you come up with an answer. Great, thanks, Colin. What do you think?
I'm wondering whether I'm thinking of it like how, because I'm in American history, I'm learning about the removal act of Indian Removal Act, how I'm like a moral history, like how it did morally, like that, like the Indian Removal Act was not really a moral thing to do. Is that something to do with it?
You're on the right track, and you're thinking in the right way about how like people act in ways that are right or wrong in historical moments. That's even a little too that's more history than he's thinking of. He's thinking of recording, not what has happened, what's literally going on in Dublin at any particular day. He's talking about what are the everyday decisions, moral dilemmas, and ethical problems that people are dealing with, right? What are the real problems at the heart of life in Dublin that's stopping people from moving forward with their lives? And life in Dublin in this period of time was tough. It was, Ireland had been repressed by England for years. At this point in time, they were trying to kind of form their own Irish identity, form their own politics, and they were really struggling to do that. So there's a lot in this book about, what does it mean to like live a successful life, to be fully formed, and Joyce kind of grappling with the failings of the people he saw around him, right? He's trying to portray this scrupulous meanness. What that means is basically he's trying to, show the country warts and all. These are all the ugly bits, and there are a lot of ugly parts about, everyday life, and I'm going to present them to you. So that's what he's after, in a harsh reality. Okay, so enough talk. Let's actually get into the work. So the first story that we'll be reading is called The Sisters. We'll read the first paragraph together, and then I'll explain the assignment. So each of these stories are pretty short. This one's 6 pages, so it's not too long. And a lot of his stories, the interesting stuff is below the surface. If you're the kind of person who likes to think abstractly or is really open to experience, or likes to like analyze films, that kind of thing, then there'll be a lot here to think about, because everything is deliberate with Joyce. Okay, so here's the first paragraph. Just talk about how this is setting the scene and what's going on here. There was no hope for him this time. It was the third stroke. Night after night, I had passed the house. It was vacation time. Had studied the lighted square of the window. And night after night, I had found it lighted in the same way, faintly and evenly. If he was dead, I thought, I would see the reflection of candles on the darkened blind, for I knew that 2 candles must be set at the head of a corpse. He had often said to me, I am no longer for this world, and I had thought his words idle. Now I knew they were true. Every night as I gazed up at the window, I said softly to myself the word paralysis. It always sounded strangely in my ears, like the word gnomon in the Euclid and the word simony in the Catechism. But now it sounded to me like the name of some maleficent and sinful being. It filled me with fear, and yet I longed to be nearer to it and to look upon its deadly works. Old Cotter was sitting at the fire smoking when I came downstairs to supper. While my aunt was ladling out my stirabout, he said, as if returning to some former remark of his. And it goes on. All right, so I'll just stop there. So the story begins with this kind of reflective paragraph that's sort of a flashback. And then the actual action of the story is the narrator, who's an unnamed boy, comes downstairs to supper. He lives with his aunt. His aunt's there with this guy, Old Cotter, who's a neighbor. And that's how the story begins. But then there's this flashback. And the flashback is the narrator, this young boy, talking about a him, this guy who has had a third stroke. He's had 3 strokes. And I'll just tell you for the sake of clarity that this guy is a local priest. So what can we infer about how the boy is feeling about the priest? Like, what is he doing, and what's the boy doing, and what can we infer from that about him, about their relationship? Yeah, Colin, what's happening here?
I think that they had like a friendly relationship, like they're on good terms, and he might have become, I don't know the story like familial wise, like whether what happened to the boy's parents, but I'm wondering if the priest was kind of like a father, something resembling a father figure to him or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he is wondering what could have gone wrong or why he had to die.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like doubting, he's mourning, I would say.
Yeah, good. I like how you're thinking here. Maybe it's a father figure, especially we know that he's living with his aunt, so that might make us question, well, where are his parents? Was this the only father figure in his life? So we know there was no hope for the priest this time, so that's not good. The priest said to him, I'm not long for this world. So the priest has this sense that he's eventually going to die. And the boy keeps visiting the priest's house night after night to look at the window, because he knows that if he was dead, I would see the reflection of candles. Right? They put candles around the body of someone who's deceased. So he keeps checking to see if there are candles, to see if the priest is dead. So obviously he cares about this priest, and there's a sort of preoccupation with mortality. So it's a very dark way to begin the story, right? But then the word paralysis pops up, right? First paragraph, so we know this is an important part of the story and all of the stories. And the boy's kind of fascinated with that word. Okay. So let me show you what I want you to do for homework with this, and I'll do it with this word as an example. So as you're reading through this story, look for sentences, maybe 2 sentences that stand out as significant or interesting in some way. So this is what stands out as interesting to me. Now the word paralysis sounds to me like the name of some maleficent and sinful being. It filled me with fear, and yet I longed to be nearer to it and look upon its deadly works. So I would read through and highlight sentences that stand out. Look for 5 quotes you can use. And then put them in a new Word doc. Oh yeah, I already did this, so I'll just use my example from the last class. So I just copy and pasted that quote in. So the boy is imagining paralysis and saying it like it just sounds kind of weird. And he's imagining it as some maleficent, evil, and sinful being. He's imagining paralysis as like a demon. Filled me with fear, and yet I long to be near it. It's almost like a siren from the Odyssey. It's like a monster, but it kind of draws you close. You're sort of fascinated with paralysis. So like, what's the appeal? Why is paralysis fascinating to him, right? And to look upon its deadly works. So paralysis is bringing death. Is the priest, is he dead because of paralysis? Like strokes usually result in paralysis, so he might literally be paralyzed. But then we're also going to be thinking about how paralysis is working metaphorically, right? So I just wrote down a couple sentences about the quote and then, moved on my way. So this is all I'm looking for you to do. Identify quotes, say like probably 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 3, maybe 3 sentences at most, and then write 1 to 3 sentences about why that quote stood out to you. I want you to do this. So one, it'll help you understand the story, because again, this is a story where not a lot happens, but there's a lot underneath the surface. 2, it'll slow you down and make you a more careful, thoughtful reader. And 3, this will be the basis for our discussion about what's happening in Sisters tomorrow with the story. Okay, so 5 of these, put them in a Word doc like this. You don't have to highlight them, but put the page number as well. You could just say, I know that's not proper MLA citation, but just put the page number in some way. In this case, I don't really care how. 5 of those, and then we'll talk about what you've noticed tomorrow. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So I'll let you continue reading on your own, and you'll find out what's happening with this boy. Consider his perspective on all this. This is a story about how the boy is reacting and interpreting the death of this priest.